Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Eat Like Ruby podcast. Welcome if you are here for the first time. I am here today with my husband, Coach Shaq. Welcome, Shaq.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Trying to think of some cool intro, but I just didn't have one.
This name drop, that's the best you can
Name
do.
drop, just name drop Shaq's name. Shaq is here today. We're going to actually record a double ep. So we are going to record an episode today about training, some updates to training, some info about training, which is just cool, juicy ep.
Yep.
And then we're going to go straight into a chatty ep about Shaq's half Ironman turf games, what all that has looked like, training, nutrition, recovery, the actual days, the events, all the things. We're sitting here right now, literally the day after turf. So Shaq did Ironman, half Ironman last Sunday, and then turf Saturday, Sunday just gone. And we're sitting here on the Monday.
Yeah, so it's been a little bit going on. But
Yeah, but we're going to talk about that more next week. So stay tuned for that. I think that's really cool because even just looking at literally what you ate on the day of the half Ironman is insane. So stay tuned. If you're a hungry gal like me who loves hearing about other people's diets right now, I'm just living through you. When this actually comes out, I'll be done.
yeah, cool.
Wrapped it up, boys. But we're going to talk about training first today.
Yeah, let's go.
So we've kind of done this episode before. We're going to speak a little bit about deloads and peak weeks and just the structure of training, but doing it today with specifically because we've made a little bit of a change in Eat Like Ruby, which we've been making behind the scenes for a long time. But like anything, I always want to kind of trial things for myself, trialed this with a few long-term girls, muscle gain girls, just the OGs that I'm like,
Yeah.
we're going to give this a go and we're going to see how it goes. And huge success. So we're going to start rolling this out with all Eat Like Ruby training and I'm excited.
Yeah, that's cool. It's cool.
Yeah. So there's a couple of changes we're bringing in, which is cool. The first thing I'm going to say is we are bringing in a very big, cool, exciting change. I want to say next month, but every person in my team behind the scenes working on it is probably like, did she just say that? We will see. Watch this space. But with training in Eat Like Ruby, we have our training only service, which is really cool. And then obviously when we do things like the fat loss phase and stuff, people can add training.
Yeah.
And it's a really common theme to come into something big like the fat loss phase. That's nutrition, training, meal plans, audios, lessons. Like it's very active. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And then when the girls have success with that, it can be really common for girls to actually do 2 rounds of something like that.
Yep.
And then when they've had their success and they're like, okay, I know what's up with nutrition. I don't need meal plans and stuff every week, but I really want to stay on for structured, consistent training. That's really common and that's really cool.
Yeah.
I love that. So what I was getting at there is we have training running at all times in different ways. And we're bringing in something very cool, especially for 2025. Like I'm gunning for the back end of this year, but absolutely this will just be the way moving forward in 2025, which is so exciting. And I'll just say, I don't want to give too much away because we'll talk about it when it really comes out, but we are bringing in a way for people to have a lot more choice and variety with their training at the lowest cost that we've probably ever run training for.
That's cool.
Which is cool. Like this is something where I've done training for so long and you look at so many things. I swear to God, guys, like we can offer so much with training and you'll still get the message of someone's like, I want to train 2 days a week and I want to train abs and legs, but not quads. And I want shoulders and I only want to be at the gym for 27 minutes and I want to do cardio first for 17 minutes. And then I can't get there every second Thursday. And like, no matter what we offer, someone's like, oh, but do you offer this as well? And you're like, oh. So we're trying to combat everything, but just kind of watching the way that training is moving and the way the world is moving with training, the whole world. But people want a bit more variety. People want to mix it up a little bit more. And this is a cool thing we're going to bring in. I don't want to talk too much about it, but you're going to be able to kind of choose what you want your focus to be and how often you want to train and stuff. And you'll be able to roll with that program for a while and progress through it. And then you'll get to pick again.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that's all I'm going to say. And then I'll give some more details when it comes out. But that's really what we're working on. And that's where we're heading. And it's very much, my work is done. I've built all my bit. But there's a lot of like tech wise behind the scenes that the girls are working on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
which
cool.
is cool. But what I want to talk about today is more the structure of training, which was spoken about a lot over the years, but also peak weeks and deloads because we've made a big change with this as well, which is cool. I like this change. I've been doing this change myself for most of the year. I've dropped it so casually on like Insta stories and stuff, and very few people, some people have like called me out thinking that it was a typo. And I've just been like, not a typo, watch this space. So what I'm talking about here is changing, literally flipping, if you will, I don't know how to say it, the order of peak weeks and deload. So basically we used to run a training program. Second last week we would peak week, last week we would deload.
Yep.
And then for some of our long-term training girls, we also would run a testing week every now and then to sort of test where you're at before going into a new program.
Yep.
The change I've brought in that I've been doing myself, been doing for some of the gals, and I'm bringing in for everyone and everything is progress through a training program, deload in the second last week, peak week in the final week.
Yeah. Love that.
And the reason for this, it kind of makes so much sense when we think about it. If we think about the long-term girls that were going like structured training program, peak week, deload, test, the point of deloading before the test week was to rest, recover, etc. before you test.
Yep.
And then I started thinking, should we do this before a peak week?
Yep.
If we think about peak week being the week where we aim for the peak amount of training volume, being reps times sets times weight. And if you've done training in Eat Like Ruby before, and if you haven't, we're going to speak about this in a minute, but you'll know that peak week is like the most sets, the most reps, and you're in the mindset of like, what's the heaviest weight I can push within reason.
Yeah.
But really hitting the peak training volume, knowing that this is the peak of the program, it's all coming together to do as much as we can, again, within reason, to finish off the program strong. And I just started thinking, the point of a deload is rest and recover for the body, for the muscles, for the mindset, for the nervous system, for all these things. It makes a bit more sense to do that before sending it in a peak week.
Yeah. 100%. I'm definitely.
You're on board.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Shaq's been a big part of this process because I sort of run everything I do with training just like as a, just kind of like a soundboard with Shaq,
Yeah.
second opinion. What do you think of this? What do you do with this? And then, like I said, obviously trialed a lot of this on myself to just see how it plays out. But I don't love the idea of testing week. I do kind of. I don't love the idea of testing week all the time and for everyone because even when I think about myself, I don't really train for heavy lifts.
Yep.
I don't train for absolute strength when we
Yep.
think about it. And if people don't know, a little bit of a side note, but when we train for strength, like training for strength and training for shape are two different training styles.
Yeah.
And there can be crossover. Obviously, if you're training for strength all the time, you're probably going to build a little bit of shape as a byproduct, and vice versa. If you're training to build shape, obviously you're going to get a bit stronger along the way. But if you're actually prioritizing one of those things, the other one isn't being optimized. And that's totally fine. Neither's right or wrong. But I don't think a lot of people know that.
Yep.
I think a lot of people just associate, I'm in the gym and I'm doing my sets and my reps and I'm getting way stronger and I'm building a wicked physique. If we look at what we actually know studies show us is the most optimal to build a wicked physique and to really fuel muscle hypertrophy, which is just muscle growth, it's more that sort of like 8 to 20 rep range.
Yep.
And when we look at what's most optimal for absolute strength, it's more like 1 to 6.
Yeah.
So again, if we think about a person doing a program with 4 sessions a week, 4 to 6 exercises in a session, if all of it is geared towards that 1 to 6 rep range, obviously we're not hitting the most optimal training for muscle growth. And then vice versa, if all of it's geared towards that 10 to 12 range, which a lot of Eat Like Ruby training is, usually anywhere from sort of 8 to 20 reps for building shape, building muscle, building the physique, we're not actually optimizing strength as much as we could.
Yeah, definitely.
Like that's not the point of the training. That's not the number one point.
Yeah.
So anyway, coming back to the testing week, I was just like, we're not really training in a way that we need to test max strength.
Yeah.
So, but a lot of the girls were loving it because it was just sort of that bit of a challenge. And it was like, oh, I've done my deload. I'm rested. Now I'll see what happens in my testing week, how hard I can go. But really, when you think about all that, that's kind of the point of peak week.
Yeah.
So we were going peak week deload test. And I was just like, we're essentially just peaking twice.
Yeah.
With a rest in the middle, which is kind of random. So I'm ditching the testing weeks. Apologies to anyone who likes testing weeks, but it's just not, I just didn't think it had its place alongside the peak weeks for what we're training for.
Yeah.
So the new structure being deload in the second last week to rest, recover, and we'll get into that in a second, like the real point of a deload. And then final week of a training program will be peak week
Yeah.
to come into it refreshed and everything after the deload
Yeah.
and hit the peak training volume to really send it.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah. Anything to say while I have a little sip of my drink?
No, I think it just works out better because I feel like myself, I like the deload before the peak or testing week, whatever it is. I feel like this solely this rests the body, the nerves, the nervous system. I feel like it's so much more beneficial.
Yeah, and I've been doing it myself, and like I said, with a few of the girls, and wicked response. We love it. And the other thing we've been doing is longer training programs. So 10-week training blocks, which is really cool. And this is something that all of the muscle gain girls did, and all of the muscle gain girls this year in 2024, and huge success. Huge feedback to anyone that had done shorter training blocks was like, I love the longer block. I've been doing it myself. Yeah, like anyone that's really come in to Eat Like Ruby for training this year, and we've been like gunning it towards muscle gain, performance shape, all of that. We've extended the training block a bit. We've always done anything from like 5, 6, 8, whatever. Yeah. There's no right or wrong with a training block. You could do a 4-week training block if you want.
Yeah.
Like there's absolutely no right or wrong with that. But when I think about somebody wanting to build shape and progress through their lifts, I love the 10-week training block because I think it just gives you so much time. If we really think about a training block, you've got week 1 is literally just find my weights, find my groove. If I'm a beginner, find where the fucking leg press is. Like you're literally just finding your feet with the program. So if we think about that being week 1, and then week 2, we always stick with the same reps and sets and everything pretty much from week 1 because you've used week 1. Let's say, for example, you get on a leg press for the first time and you put like 10 kilos each side because you're just thinking, I don't fucking know what I can do.
Yeah,
I don't want to put 100 on it and look like a dickhead, which you wouldn't, but everyone feels that way. Yeah. So if you put 10 each side and you do your reps and then you're like, okay, that was really easy. And then you might go to like 20 each side, do your reps and go, still pretty easy. You might sort of end with 40 per side. This is purely just an example. But then you're like, okay, cool, that's kind of my starting weight, sweet spot. Like that's where I'm starting.
This is my starting point, yeah.
Yeah, so if you've used all 3 sets on the leg press, for example, in week 1 to do that, when you go into week 2, you'll probably just start with 70 or 80, like 40 each side or wherever you sort of ended the last week.
Yeah.
So the first thing I want to say there is because right now sitting here, we've just finished the first week in the fat loss phase. And so many of the girls were like, oh, like I had to kind of use that first week to find my groove and find my weights. And I think they had a little bit of an energy of like, oh, did I waste a week or am I sort of falling behind on the training? And I'm like, no, that is literally what week 1 is. Even if I think about myself or you or anyone who's really experienced, if you go into a new program and especially if there's new exercises or new lifts, literally the point of week 1 is to find your starting point.
Yeah.
So if you spend the whole week doing that on every exercise, that's awesome. Don't see that as I've fallen behind, I've failed, I've wasted the week, I didn't make the most of it, whatever. That's literally the point of week 1.
Yeah.
So if we think about week 1 being like that, and then like I said, in week 2, you might go in and be like, okay, cool. Now I kind of know where my starting point is. I don't have to go through those super
Awkward
trial
steps,
and error, like light ones. Yeah. But then you also might do your 3 sets at that weight that you found last week and be like, okay, cool. Now that like my nerves have calmed down a little bit, everything's good. That actually wasn't that hard.
Yeah.
And again, if you find yourself in that position in week 2, that's perfect as well.
Yeah.
And so if we think about that, if someone's doing a 5-week training program with a peak week and a deload and everything factored in, if your first 2 weeks look like that, all of a sudden now you're like a week away from peak week.
Yeah.
And really you're just getting started and finding
You're just
your
finding your
groove.
feet, yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I was just like, I really want to extend these a little bit more. And like I said, we did it with the muscle gain girls, and the muscle gain girls were such a good mix of girls I'd worked with before, new girls. Most of them had a bit of training experience, but some of their exercises were new or some of the lifts were new. And they just loved this 10-week structure because it really was weeks 1 or 2, find my groove. Weeks 3 or 4, just actually settle in. Like when I first walk into the gym, I can hit those weights straight away. I know where I'm starting. Like they're really kind of settled in
Yeah.
those weeks. And then we start to ramp up the RPE, which if people don't know is rate of perceived exertion. So basically how hard you find the exercise. If we think about week 1 and 2 of a training program, pretty much everything is RPE 6 or 7.
Yeah.
And again, that's the point. We don't want you to go into day 1 and find your 10 out of 10 weight
Yeah.
because you've never done the thing before, or it is week 1 of the program. If we think about everything we know about training, the point of training is progression.
Yeah.
If you go 10 out of 10 on day 1, where the fuck are you progressing to?
Legit.
That's literally not the point. And I mean, we could take this in a whole nother direction of people that think they need to go balls to the wall in every single training session. But I think you and I spoke about that the other week. People disregarding RPE.
Yep.
I'm getting deja vu.
That old chestnut.
Yeah. But if we think about weeks 1 and 2 being RPE 6 or 7, then we come into weeks 3 or 4, we start to see an 8 here or there. We start to come into weeks 5 and 6, we see a few more 8s, we start to see a 9. And this is where we sort of start to establish like the main lift of the program. So we might do something like a cable kickback to get the glutes going straight away, or what's another goodie? Single leg press. I love to do at the start of a program. Get both legs sort of warmed up and working. I'm not going to go RPE 10 on the first exercise.
Yep.
Ever. Normally I would go like that will always stay around that 7, maybe an 8 right towards the end. But the point of that first exercise is to sort of get the muscles warmed up and firing that we want to start working. And then usually we would see the second lift, maybe the third lift, depending on the structure of the program, is the big RPE. That's the big main lift.
Yep.
So that's where all of them will probably start at RPE 7. And then in weeks 3 or 4, we start to see an RPE 8 on that main lift. Weeks 5 and 6, we start to see the RPE 9. Weeks, 7, 8 towards the end, we start to see RPE 10. So you've got a few weeks there. We are really aiming for that 10 out of 10. And if we step back and look at a 10-week program, if we're running that new structure of deload in the 9th, peak week in the 10th, you're sort of progressing for 8 weeks. And if we think about a heavy lift starting at that RPE 7, moving to the 8, moving to the 9, often we'll bring in the 4th set at some point. So there's that little bit of progression every week. You find yourself in sort of week 7 and weeks 8. And this is what I kept saying to the muscle gain girls. Really from like week 7 onwards, you're going to be getting after it.
Yeah.
Like if we've spent 6 weeks gradually building up to this, you find yourself in week 7. RPE 8s and 9s are there. The 4th set is starting to creep in on some things. Occasionally we'll see a 5th set. Sorry, not sorry. And if we do that up to week 8 and then we deload in week 9 and then we have that rest and recovery, which we'll talk about a bit more soon, we then go into peak week. We've spent like 8 weeks really progressing through that and building up to heavy weights, building up to big sets, whatever. We then have a rest and allow the body to just chill out for a second before hitting literally the point of peak week is to hit the peak of all those things combined. That's a wicked 10 weeks.
Yeah, that's great.
I love it. That's great. That's great from Coach Shaq. I just realized we didn't ask you for a quote, so we'll do it at the end.
Okay.
I feel like you've got one in the chamber and you didn't, I didn't ask you for it. Shit, we'll do it at the end. Yeah, and so like I keep saying, huge success with the muscle gain girls. They loved it. And really the thing with them was them just being like, I feel like I can settle in and really progress with this.
Yeah.
I don't have to sort of rush. I'm not going from finding my feet to suddenly being in peak week.
Yeah, 'cause that's the whole point about progression. Like,
Yeah.
that's how you want it. That simple, like, letting my feet, getting into it. Okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm not nervous anymore. Let's go.
Yeah, really finding my comfort. And the thing I'll say is if you're someone who likes a bit of variety and mixing up your training, we're kind of doing, if you know a lot about training, people talk a little bit about like a mesocycle, a macrocycle, all that sort of thing. I don't get too much into that with my girls because I think it's just a bit over the top. Like, really we want progressive training.
Yeah.
Right. But what we've kind of done is broken the 10 weeks up into 2 5 weeks. So at the 5-week mark or at the start of week 6, really, we've got a few little changes to the program. So something might have been like a body weight exercise if we were doing it for the first time.
Yep.
And then we bring in a dumbbell at the halfway point. So halfway point being start of week 6. Or maybe we were doing something with a dumbbell like often we'll do like a glute bridge or hip thrust or something with a dumbbell, especially if it's like a first program.
Yeah.
And then at the halfway point, we switch to the barbell.
Yeah.
So the actual program and the movements and everything are the same, but there's a few little progressions with the actual exercises that
Yeah.
we occasionally do. And a similar thing with the ab work. So if we think about ab work, most of it, not always, but most of it is really body weight, holds, etc. And therefore, we're kind of limited with progression because we can't really get heavier.
Yeah.
If we think about progression, we progress with like reps, sets, weights, time. If we think about abs, weight gets taken away from that. So we lose a big thing that we can usually progress with.
Yeah.
So my point there is with the 10 weeks, we're essentially running like the same ab stuff for 5 weeks. And then as we come into week 6, we mix that up a little bit as well. So there's just those like subtle little changes that are a progression on exercises. And then obviously the overall 10 weeks is progression on volume, and volume being reps times sets times weight.
Yeah.
Does that all make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So I'm excited.
Yeah, it's cool. It's definitely it's cool to see like the outlay and like knowing how it all works. It's so exciting.
Yeah. So let's talk about the deload a little bit more. We've spoken about this before, but now that we've changed up the structure of training, I'm not going to refer people back to those episodes because they're not going to make as much sense. So, and it's cool to kind of touch on things again because obviously right now we have over 200 gals in the fat loss phase, which is unreal. And we've got a lot of training girls in Eat Like Ruby, and we've got a lot of girls that have done the fat loss phase all year. It's not a phase, it's a year, which we love, but they are very much at the point of, okay, I need to go into training only. They know it and it's time. Yeah. So I think it's cool to kind of touch on stuff again and just give people a bit of a refresh on things like this. So the deload is essentially what we've kind of already explained it to be. It is a week of reduced training volume to intentionally give the body, the mind, the nervous system, everything a bit of a breather.
Yeah.
And what I always liken it to and compare it to is weekends and holidays. If you think about a person going to work every single day with no day off, no break, no nothing in sight, we can't deliver and show up in the same way. I think it'd be cool to like actually look into the specifics of this, but I think there's something that happens in the human brain when you know that relief is coming or that you are actually progressing through something. If we think about everything we just spoke about, imagine a person who's not on a progressive program and they're literally just going to the gym, going as hard as they can indefinitely. Like you're going to have peaks and troughs. Like anything in life, you're going to have peaks and troughs. So the deload in the peak week and the progressions and everything is essentially like setting up the peaks and troughs and being proactive to work with them so that you don't have to sort of become a victim to them.
Yeah.
If you just go into the gym with like balls to the wall, I'm just training as hard as I can, as often as I can, every single like day after day, week after week, month after month, you're going to hit the wall at some point.
Oh, 100%.
And just have those natural peaks and troughs, like I said. And then people can get into the mentality of like, you know, if you have a trough where you're just having a bit of a downer and you don't feel like it physically, maybe it's mentally, maybe it's emotionally, there's so many things that can come in here. But if you just hit a bit of a wall with training, then with a lot of that can come like guilt and I'm a failure and I should be going more and I feel like I need a day off, but should I have a day off? Is that wrong? Is it bad to skip training? Like there's a lot that can kind of then play out there. If we think about a person having a structured progressive program that intentionally allows for an easier week, like I said, I think there's something that happens in the brain where the person is working towards that, knowing like, no, I'm not slacking off this week because my actual slack off week is coming.
Yeah.
If I slack off in week 7, I'm going to kind of regret that because it's going to fuck the structure of the program, and my actual rest is coming, like you said.
Yeah.
So you kind of just, I reckon subconsciously people just progress through things better, being like, I need to make the most of these weeks, and then I'll have the rest week when the rest week actually gets here.
Yeah.
So I think that's really beneficial and just an important thing to think about. And if you're someone who doesn't have a structured program, just something to look at, where are you just going like as hard as you can, as often as you can, with no peaks, troughs, structured, intentional rest, anything like that in sight.
Yeah. I feel like that's a old school mentality. The more I can do, the better I'll be, which...
Yeah, I mean, that's nearly a whole different topic, but It's just like I said, if people, I feel like you can only do that for so long. Like physically, your body's going to be fucked at some point, but mentally, emotionally, you're just going to hit a point as well where you're like, I
Fuck
don't
it.
have it in
Yeah.
me. Like, I'm not going this week. And that's where, if your plan begins and ends with, I'll go as hard as I can, as much as I can, the second you're in a position of going, no, I'm not going to go this week, you've essentially failed on the plan.
Yeah.
And it's like what we talk about with nutrition. When someone has a really strict approach in place, the second you move away from that strict thing, you're, quote, a failure.
Yeah.
What if you allowed for structure and flexibility and rest and all these things we talk about? Then you can actually work with that. When a person goes into deload week, they're not feeling like a failure, even though they are really chilling with their training, because they're intentionally chilling with their training.
Yeah. And I feel like mentally too, like knowing that rest is coming, it's like, I
Yeah.
can't fucking wait. Let's go. Like,
Yeah, well, that's a cool thing to talk about because that's kind of what I was saying where I was going with the weekend and holiday chat and stuff. When you know, like when you're at work and the weekend is coming or the holiday is coming or whatever, you can kind of get in that energy of like, oh, get this job done. And like physically your work, I think you carry out better work because you know that the downtime is coming. And then you're sort of like, oh, it's almost like deadline energy, like gonna get this done before that rest gets here. And
yeah.
then think about sort of going in on a Friday, you're like, fuck yeah, it's Friday. Like I think the big subconscious thing happening below the surface there that we don't really think about is just there's structured times to go hard and structured times that we pull back.
Yeah.
And so we respond well to that. When we remove that, it's just like, oh my God, what do I do? Just go and go and go and go until I hit the wall and I can't go anymore.
Yeah.
So I think knowing that the deload is coming just provides that. And then when we think about going into the actual deload, I think there's a few things to look at here. So the way we structure a deload in Eat Like Ruby is advising to aim for roughly 60% of last week's weight.
Yeah.
So if we think about it now being week 8 is the week before the deload, like we just said, you've progressed through 8 weeks of training. You've got those high RPEs, you've got the extra sets, you've got a lot going on there. Pretty big week of training. It's essentially a step away from peak week
Yeah.
because it's the biggest sessions before peak week. So you then go into deload, and like I said, we advise to hit roughly 60% of last week's training, last week's weights, sorry. The little thing I'll say there is don't overthink it. This is why I say roughly. Don't be like, oh my God, I did 97.5. What is 60% of that? Just look and sort of go like, what is roughly 60-ish percent of what I did last week?
Yeah.
And so that's what we advise. And a few things can play out here. Sometimes people can be a little bit in the energy of like, oh, but I'm pumped and I'm loving training. I don't want to scale back. A couple of things to look at there. The first one is we want to have a break before we need a break.
Yeah.
We want to be a little bit proactive and be like, okay, if you don't feel like you need one, let's have one before. It'd be like saying, no, I don't need to have a weekend. I'll keep working. And then getting to like a Thursday and just being like, fuck, I need a day off.
Yeah.
So if people think that they should skip the deload, and this almost ties in with what we were saying about people disregarding RPE and then hitting like a point of burnout. I see this all the time. People tell me all the time, oh, I just ignored the RPE and just went for it. And then 2 weeks later, that same person is saying to me, Rubes, I'm feeling really burnt out. No fucking shit. I wonder why. Because you ignored everything else I said. Do I even answer you? Because I don't think you listen to what I say.
Legit.
But if we have the deload and we intercept that first before we feel like we need it, it's super beneficial. And what tends to happen there is people will be a little bit in that energy of like, I think it's equal parts like, A, I don't want to scale back because I'm pumped and I'm loving life and I'm getting after it. I don't want to have an easier week. But I think B, there's a fear around training has to be hard and intense and scary and ass kicking and all these things. If I have a quote easy week, am I going to lose all my results? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Like,
Yeah. It's not possible.
no, that's just not. And if we think about a person doing 10-week training blocks, if I think about next year, Eat Like Ruby, so with what I said before, with what we're bringing in, with the variety in the programs, it's essentially going to be every 10 weeks, you'll get to pick your new one.
Yeah.
So we're doing 10-week training block, progress through it for the 8 weeks, deload in the 9th, peak week in the 10th. When you're in that 10th week, you can look at the other programs and be like, oh, do I want to run this one again? Do I want to mix it up? We've got a bit of a different focus. You can pick how many days, etc. If we think about a person doing that for 50 weeks of the year, let's say, like you do one for 10 weeks, you go to another one, you go to another one, step back and look at a person that's trained for 50 weeks of the year, progress for 8 weeks, deloaded in the 9th, peak week in the 10th, repeat for 50 weeks, that's wild.
That's
That's
crazy.
so good.
Yeah.
Like, if you can really settle into that and kill it with that, that's wicked training. And the deload is absolutely not going to send you backwards or undo results. It's going to absolutely serve a purpose. Even if we think about everything we've spoken about with training before, where the real point of training is adaptation. We push the body to a point that it hasn't hit before and it has to adapt. And we've spoken about the fact that that adaptation happens in the recovery process. Deload allows to really catch up on that recovery
Yep.
process. If we think about a person doing, like I just said, 50 straight weeks of training with no deload, no downtime, no chill time,
It's
you're actually cock blocking your growth and your results
Legit.
because your body needs
the
the
rest.
rest and recovery
Yeah.
to grow and everything. So that's just an important thing to think about if you're in the mindset of like, oh, I shouldn't have an easier week. From two professionals, yes, you should.
You should.
Just straight up. And if you think that you shouldn't, well, write your own bloody training.
Legit.
So that's where I was going with that is often people can be a little bit hesitant to go into the deload for some of those reasons.
Yeah.
By far, one of the most common things I see is someone just before deload going, oh, I don't really want to do this. I want to keep pushing. Halfway through deload week, oh my God, this is fucking awesome.
Yep.
I didn't realize that I needed this. I didn't realize how much I would enjoy this. This is so much relief. Again, physical relief for my body, my muscles, my joints, all the things that have been getting after it for 2 months. My mindset, even just going into the gym. Think about a person going into the gym loading a 100-kilo hip thrust bar who suddenly goes in and goes, oh my God, I only have to do 60 today.
Yeah.
I would love to like research what happens in the brain of a person. If you think about psyching yourself up for 100 kilo, or I've got girls in it like we're doing 200 kilo hip thrusts. Like if you think about psyching yourself up for that versus then the deload week where you're like, oh my God, I only have to do like 60%.
Yeah.
It's the best feeling. It's so much relief. You're like, fuck yes. And then when you actually, I feel like the hip thrust, I don't know if it's just me, the hip thrust is like the one thing that I really feel this on. Loading it and then the actual first rep, you're just like, oh my God, that's fucking great.
That's great.
Compared to like the week before, you've probably done 4 sets of 10 RPE 10. Suddenly you're doing like 3 sets of 10 at 60%.
Yeah.
You do that first one, you're like, oh. So it's that physical, the mental, the emotional, everything that comes with it. And then usually what happens as well is maybe we're hesitant to do it, maybe we're not. If you've progressed really well through training, you could be at a point, bit of a side note, but usually when someone's been in Eat Like Ruby for a while and they've gone through this process, they've really started to realize the benefits of deload and they get into the mindset and the routine of progressing through training, being like, yes, deload's here, enjoy it, and now I know I'm going to send it again on the other side. So usually we come up to the deload, and if you're new, you might be a little bit hesitant. If you're an OG sort of long-term gal, you're probably like, fuck yes, deload, come at me. Regardless of where you fall with that, usually we work our way through 2 or 3 of those sessions and we start to get to the middle of deload week and people are a bit like, okay, yep, I needed this. This was awesome. Feeling good and fucking pumped for next week.
Yep.
And that in itself is such a win because, again, think about a person that's just grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding through training with no end in sight. They might have those odd times where they're like, yeah, fuck, I'm pumped for gym. They're probably also having a lot of times where they aren't.
Yeah.
And if we, again, think about taking, like being proactive and taking control of that situation, we've had intentional progression, intentional rest, and then we've created that hype of being like, fuck yes, I'm getting back into it.
Yep.
And that's exactly what we want. If we think now about the new structure of someone going into peak week in the mentality of like, physically I'm rested, but mentally and emotionally I'm also rested, but I'm starting to get psyched again.
Yeah, because I feel like the biggest thing, like, not just body-wise, it's just mentally.
Mm-hmm.
If you can take that step away in your head, it's like, oh, just take a step back and like, okay, let's fucking go.
Yeah, like you just get that bit of a breather, you get some clarity, and then you're like, oh, okay, I've had my chill time.
Yeah,
I'm ready. I'm
ready to go
ready.
now.
Come at me peak week. And it's like, what better structure?
Legit. Like,
And that's even part of the reason why we made that change. If we think about the point of deload, you could have deload anytime. You could deload in week 3.
yeah.
You could deload literally anytime. I know people that deload in week 1, and I actually trialed this at the start of this year because I thought about bringing this in. And what I mean by that is deloading in week 1, because a lot of people do this because week 1 is that kind of find your
Trial.
groove.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, why not sort of put them together? Like you're going to be lifting a bit lighter anyway. See that as your deload. The reason I didn't run with that is because new people coming in wouldn't get it. You can't
Yeah.
tell a person that's never lifted weights to lift 60% of what they normally lift because they don't normally lift.
Yeah.
So I love the idea of that. I've heard a lot of coaches lately talking about deloading in week 1. And I love that in theory. Like for myself, I feel like it'd be beneficial because you're like, okay, week 1 of new program, I'll intentionally lift lighter while I settle into the program. That's essentially what they're saying.
Yeah.
Which I think in theory and like physically that's really effective. But again, a lot of people wouldn't understand that.
Yeah.
It wouldn't work that well
Yeah.
with new people. So that was my reasoning for not progressing with that. But what I was getting at there is you can deload any time. The
Yeah.
point of deload is just to have an intentional rest before you hit the fucking wall and need one. So you can bring that in at any time. And really, when I was looking at all this, like I just said, I trialed a week 1 deload for a few months and decided against that. And then when I thought about one of the benefits of deload being the hype that gets built back up, I was like, well, why not line this up so that that hype gets carried into peak week?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we think about the other way around, like how we've done it before with peak week and then a deload, that can absolutely work. And my girls have killed it with that for years. But when you think about getting to peak week is almost like a race. If we think about, we've got an episode coming out in a few weeks with Lockie, who's a running coach.
Yep.
And we've already recorded it, but it's coming out in a few weeks. We spoke about the point of tapering before an event. This is almost the same thing. Deload is like a taper.
Correct.
And then peak week is like the event. So if we think about that old structure of progressing through a program, doing peak week at the end of the progression and then a deload, you're going into peak week pretty fatigued.
Yeah.
And that's fine because you're still sort of progressing and it can work. Like I said, my girls have made it work for ages. But again, just stepping back and looking at it, I was like, well, what if we pulled that to the other side of the deload? Progress, deload, get the physical, mental, emotional benefits of the rest and the deload, create the hype at the same time, go into that final week of that program, refreshed, like body's feeling fresh, mind's feeling fresh, and you're psyched and pumped to get after it. What better way to peak week? Again, it's almost like the event of the program.
Yeah.
Big yes from me.
Yeah.
And then we pick our new program with the new system. Hurry up, girls, get it built. And we go again into week 1.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. And the other little thing to say there, I mean, it's probably a whole other topic and I'll talk about it when the new system starts to roll in, but it's not like we go into a new program and every single thing is brand new. Like when you go into a new program, you're still going to see some form of hip thrust, whether it's barbell, dumbbell, Smith machine, maybe it's CAS, maybe it's cluster, like a variation, but you're still going to have a hip thrust in there. You're going to have some sort of pull movement, deadlift, RDL. Again, maybe it's barbell, trap bar, dumbbells, whatever. We're going to push in some way, whether it's a squat, leg press, lunge. You're not going to have this brand new program where you have to fully find your feet with everything again. You're probably going to open up your new program and go, oh, RDLs again, but a different version of a hip thrust.
Yeah.
And, split squats again, but a goblet squat instead of a leg press. Like there's going to be
Different.
mix-ups like that. And that's kind of the point of training. We've spoken about this before, where you want enough repetition and consistency that you can actually continue to progress. But then you want some variety to physically make your body work. You know, if you do the same thing over and over, it can be a little bit too repetitive.
And
you want to
mentally
spice it
too.
up. Yeah, and then that was my next point. Mentally, you want to look and go, oh, like split squats. I've never done them before. Oh, leg curls. That's
Yeah.
new. So that's exactly what we go for with training is you're absolutely going to see things. And we've said this before on the podcast. I've been deadlifting for 16 years. You're
Yeah.
not going to get to a point where you're like, oh, I did deadlifts for 10 weeks. I don't do them anymore.
Yeah.
You're going to run out of exercises pretty fucking quickly. So that's really sort of the point and the structure of training and the reason why I've made the changes that I've made. I'm super excited.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. I
Yeah.
approve.
Thank you. I've got Shaq's approval. So yeah, that's the change we're going to start seeing in Eat Like Ruby programs. I mean, if you listen back to this episode in 2025, that's just how training's going to be.
Yeah.
But with current girls, you'll start to see that little bit of a tweak. And yeah, I'm excited. I think
Yeah.
it's cool.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah. And I'd say my last little piece of advice is to anyone who does feel like they, quote, don't need to deload. If you look back over your year of training and you're like, oh no, I never did hit the wall and I don't think I need a deload, whatever, I would say the sign there is, well, I'd say you got to push a bit harder.
Yeah.
If you actually didn't hit a point of fatigue with training in the year, again, if we think about the point of training is to push to the point of adaptation, the body's only adapting and hitting that point when it's pushed hard enough to do so.
Yeah.
If you've spent your whole year being like, no, I'm good, I'd probably ramp it up a little bit. And then again, if you're quite new to Eat Like Ruby or structured training or anything and you're thinking like, oh, I don't really want to deload, I want to just keep progressing, deload is part of the progression.
Yep. You need it.
You absolutely, like, don't ignore it. Like I said, don't ignore the boss. She's the boss. I've got my hat on today. Take me seriously. Take me seriously. Do what I bloody say. So that's a wrap on the deload chat. We didn't get our quote from Shaq at the start, which I'm disappointed in myself. I forgot all about it. So we're going to finish with a quote from Coach Shaq. What have you got from us?
Finish with a bang. And guys, I actually tried this one on Ruby the other day and she approved.
I did. I can't remember what it was though, but I remember being like, bring that to the pod.
Also, how dare you forgetting it?
What was it?
All right, so people are jealous of you, but aren't jealous of the work you do.
Absolute banger. Absolute banger. I
Guys,
feel like
get the shirts ready. Let's go.
I feel like that is so applicable
It's
to
so true.
training, nutrition, dieting, physique, but also like business, finance, like literally anything.
Yeah, it's it's a bang on one.
Mm-hmm. What is it? What did you get it of someone else?
I heard of a different podcast.
Ross, I mean Ross actually.
I think it was with him. But
Shaq's obsessed.
Yeah.
Shaq is obsessed.
It was with him, but another guy said it, Chris, I can't remember his last name.
Right.
Yeah.
And what did it mean to you? What did it trigger in you when you heard it?
I think it literally just what we talked about, the progression. It's like when people's working, you're jealous of those higher people. Like,
the results.
Yeah, and people forget about all that hard work, which honestly
100%.
is so, when you get into that and actually like progress stuff smartly, deload and stuff, it's actually so fun.
Smartly. I reckon it's so common with the internet and physiques, like seeing people's physiques on the internet. And like you said, being if you're running with that thing of like jealous, people are jealous of, what'd you say? People are jealous of what?
People are jealous of you, but aren't jealous of the work.
Yeah, I reckon that would be so common for looking at a physique and being like, oh my God, I want that bod. But it's like, do you want every single thing that has gone into creating that bod? And I feel like it's the same with business as well. I think so many people look at an online business and like, oh my God, I want to work online.
And it's just like the work behind, like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. I love that.
Banger.
Yeah. Do you want mine?
We got a quote from Ruby.
Yeah. You say that with shock all the time, but like,
hold the damn
I
phone.
do it all the time now.
Just trying to cut my grass here, guys.
I swear you said exactly that last time.
All right, hit me with it.
I've already used this on you in the Insta caption.
Oh, here we go.
The only difference between people who succeed and people who do not is that the successful person never gave up.
Yeah, I want that one. That's good.
It
I like that.
could not be more true.
Yeah, I like that.
The thing I would look at there is the single only thing that stops someone from being successful is that they give up.
Yep, correct.
Enough said. I could talk about that all day. I'm refraining from going on a massive rant about that. But really think about that. The single only thing that makes a person unsuccessful is that they stop.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like, yeah.
Whether it's, well, if you think about Ironman training, like you, which we're going to talk about in the next episode, but you just did not give up. And that's why you got it done. Spoiler alert, he did it. But it's I see it with the fat loss phase as well, where, or like any goal, any sort of fat loss, we don't see it as much with muscle gain, but if you stop, you're done.
Yeah.
You're guaranteeing
You're cooked.
being unsuccessful if you stop.
Yeah. I like that.
The only difference between people who succeed, and if we think about business, like we were just talking about, the online business thing.
Yeah.
I've watched so many people try and build an online business. The only difference between them and me is I haven't stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. That's a good quote.
It is, I know.
You're not to my level just yet, but we got some growing to do.
Well, that's great because I'm not going to stop. So I'm going to be successful.
just honestly, this is it, guys. I'm the bar, and she's trying to chase me the whole time.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will be back next week. Like I said, big update on Ironman Turf, all of the things. Shaq, tell people where they can find you.
You can follow me on Instagram on coach_Shaq.
Love it. Make sure you are liking, subscribing, following the pod, whatever it is that you do these days. And YouTube, Eat Like Ruby on YouTube.
Yep.
I love YouTube, guys. More people need to be on YouTube. It's so fun. So get over there, Eat Like Ruby, and eat_like_Ruby on Insta. But we'll be back next week with big update for Shaq. And if you're a person sitting there thinking, I don't really care about Ironman or turf or whatever, we're more going to talk about also like the training and the nutrition and everything that goes into that, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And the week after, we've got Shaq back again with the episode with Lockie,
Yeah, that's
who's
cool.
a big running coach and gives us heaps and heaps of juicy info about setting up training for
Running.
lifting and running and making it all work. So very cool. But we will be back next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.